Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and I want to talk about Lewis Hamilton signing his 2-year extension. I know it was last week, but I've been kind of thinking, well, I just want to try to give my thoughts about it. I don't like it, and it's not just because he's as pleasant as a bout of diphtheria. I think there's a big problem in Formula 1 with drivers hanging around too long, and we've talked about this on the channel before, but Lewis Hamilton is more than 15 years, isn't it? It's about 15, 16 years into his career. He's a 7-time champion. He's won over 100 races. He doesn't need to sign another 2-year contract. He doesn't need to do another 2 years of Formula 1 for God knows how much money. I'm sure it's a lot. I don't think he was the best option. I think it's a bit like if back in the day Alan Shearer at the end of his career had signed another 2-year contract instead of retiring. Alan Shearer is obviously a club legend for Newcastle, but by the end of his career he was scoring like 10 goals a season compared to like his prime when he was doing twice as much as that. Probably even less than 10. I can't actually remember what the end of his career was like. I don't think it was that bad. But you get what I mean. It's like an older football player. He's out of form. He's past his prime, but he sticks around a bit too long. Mercedes obviously have a lot of love for Hamilton. He's had a lot of success with them, but he's not exactly, flying high at the moment. At the he might be the third best driver in the championship this year, or third place. Might. And the only reason for that is Aston Martin seem to have lost in the development race. Maybe they've just gone completely all in on 2024. But I can't see Lewis Hamilton catching either Red Bull. He's definitely not catching Max. I'm not even sure he can. But I don't think he's going to catch Sergio Perez. So at best, he's third. That's really as good as it's going to get. Red Bull have the advantage where whatever developments they want to do, or how they do it, they're building off a good platform. Worst case scenario, they do something that loses them a couple of tenths of a second, they take it back off. Any extra speed they gain is more of an advantage. And that's going to be true next year and in 2025. 2026, if they have a big shake-up of the regulations, things will change then. But for God's sake, do not sign Lewis Hamilton for another 2 years in 2026. We do not need that. There's so many decent young drivers, especially in Formula 2, but even in IndyCar and Formula E and various other series as well, who are just never going to get a chance in Formula 1 because you've got Lewis Hamilton who's been there for 16, 17 years. Daniel Ricciardo has come back, and it's been proven that Liam Lawson would be a good shout for that second AlphaTauri seat, but I bet as soon as Ricciardo is ready, he'll jump back in. Which isn't a bad thing, because I want to see Lawson win the Super Formula Championship, or at least go for it. It's kind of a weak move to put Ricciardo back in that car when Lawson has proven to be a pretty decent young driver. They should have given Nick De Vries more of a chance in the first place. But I do hope Liam Lawson does get a chance. I think he's proven that he's ready for a Formula 1 seat. You have Lance Stroll, who's probably been there nearly 10 years now, and let's face it, he's not going to do anything. Fernando Alonso, who seems to forget that time exists, and he was racing in Formula 1 22 years ago. I know he's not been there the whole time, but he's still done 17, 18 seasons or something ridiculous. Which would be fine. If there's one person, let Alonso have it. Let him have the 20-year career and the most races ever. But that should be his special thing. The problem is, we've seen these records. Riccardo Patrese held the record for most races entered for 20, 25 years? It might be longer than that. I can't remember when Rubens Barrichello beat it. But yeah, so when Rubens Barrichello became most experienced, and it was 3 or 4 years, and Kimi Raikkonen was, and then Fernando Alonso was, and I'm not even sure how low in the list Riccardo Patrese is now. But it's partly because the calendar has got so much bigger, but also because people are sticking around for so long. I was surprised Vettel retired, but thank God he did, because at least it freed up one seat for Fernando Alonso. But in a roundabout way, that got Oscar Piastri on the grid. Lewis Hamilton doesn't need the money. He's got all his business projects, his movie he's making. he just doesn't seem that hungry for wins anymore. I know he keeps talking about wanting this 8th championship, but there's no guarantee that's ever going to happen. In fact, it seems like a far off chance right now. The only thing that's ever going to play in his favour is if the FIA decide to nerf Red Bull, which it's not impossible. In fact, I think it's probable that at least by next year they'll do something. It may not be too obvious, but they'll do something. And other teams will catch up as well. I think Christian Horner said it best when he said, rather than nerfing the top car, you just give it time until everyone sort of equalises to the same point. Because there's only so far you can push it forward. Like Red Bull, as I said, they're going to develop it, but it's going to be little bits here and there because the car's pretty much perfect. So it's up to everyone else to catch up now. And eventually someone will, or a few teams will, hopefully. That's what you really want. You want 10 cars being very quick and challenging each other. That's what we're not getting. Well, we haven't had that since like probably 2008, 2007 maybe. Even then, it was really just 2 manufacturers, but it seemed more competitive at the time. You had Sebastian Vettel winning in a Toro Rosso, I suppose, and Robert Kubica as well in the BMW Sauber. And then after that, we had Brawn, and then it was just sort of Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes were the only teams that ever took victories. And really, apart from the odd fluke here or there, that's been the case for a very long time. I think for Formula 1 to be competitive, it needs a lot of new blood. And we need to see drivers like Lewis Hamilton and Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll, probably others as well, Sergio Perez maybe. They need to step aside and let someone else have a go. Because it's just so few drivers get to have a go at Formula 1. And like Mercedes have a great young driver in Frederic Vesti. If he won the Formula 2 championship this year, it'd be the worst mistake of his life because there's nowhere for him to go. And there's no space in Formula 1 for him because you've got people like Valtteri Bottas as well, who've just been hanging around for so long because there's no space for these really great drivers coming up. And for Mercedes, if Vesti wins it this year, at best, he's going to be a Mercedes reserve driver. Maybe he'll get loaned to McLaren or Aston Martin. They don't really need him, do they? Williams, maybe. But as a reserve driver, not a full-time driver. So he'll be sitting on the sidelines for at least a couple of years, and then it depends if the Williams seat gets free because they don't keep Logan Sargent or Alexander Albon moves on, or maybe finally Lewis Hamilton retires and then Vesti can move on up. But if that doesn't happen, Vesti's just been wasted. And he'll end up somewhere decent like IndyCar or Formula E because he's a good driver. But still, Formula 1 could do with some new young guys coming up. I think it's sad we only get to see 1 or 2 a year. The grid could kind of do with 4 or 5 guys coming up at the same time. And that's where having more manufacturers on the grid would be great. I know the teams are against it because they don't want to share their money, but from a fan's perspective, and this is a fan, or it should be a fan, they should make the fans happy so they keep watching so they can get all their sponsorship money. But it doesn't work like that. But the status quo in Formula 1 has become so boring. Like every year the grid, you look at it and it's so similar to the year before. And I just wanted to have a big shake-up. And I'm fed up of people like Lewis Hamilton taking these contracts. 2 years. Why? It's like 19-year career. And the second half of it is going to be pretty shitty for you because at best you're 3rd to 6th. There's no guarantee you're going to win races. Let's not forget it's been nearly like 650 days since you last won a race. That's just going to continue for longer and longer. Until maybe you get a fluke win here or there. Or maybe Mercedes get their act together. But there's no guarantee that's ever going to happen. It's just very, very disappointing. And I've never really liked the idea of having a career cap. But you know in Formula 2, once you win a championship, you're not allowed to be in Formula 2 anymore. I think if Formula 1 had you can have 10 full seasons, maybe 3 part-time seasons, and then you could have like one-off appearances to replace an injured driver on like a case-by-case basis, which the FIA can judge, which is dangerous, but would give them a chance. That way, once their 10 years are up, they can't sign another contract in Formula 1. They can sign on as a development driver, but that's it. And then that means you've got this Formula 1 talent who've been around a while, got experience at the top of motorsport, and then they have to go somewhere else. They have to go to IndyCar, they have to go to World Endurance, they have to go to DTM, maybe even the British touring cars or various other touring car series, or anything else. Anything they wanted to do, they could do. Supercars in Australia. Like, Daniel Ricciardo really wants to do NASCAR. Do it! Like, I don't have a problem with Daniel Ricciardo showing up in NASCAR. I just don't want to see him in Formula 1. It's not that I dislike Daniel Ricciardo. I really like Daniel Ricciardo. But he's had a long enough Formula 1 career that he doesn't need to come back with AlphaTauri. Lewis Hamilton does not need to sign another contract with Mercedes. He should, if he wants to get into motorsport somewhere else, I'm sure Mercedes could fit him in somewhere. I don't know if Mercedes are doing a hypercar project, but I'm sure at some point they will. But if not, I mean, Mercedes have cars in DTM. I know it's way lower than what he'd consider his standards, but Mika Hakkinen did it. And Mika Hakkinen's better than Lewis Hamilton ever was. So why not do DTM? It'd be nice to see these other motorsports have these drivers come over. Because it just makes motorsport better. You want to see people like Lewis Hamilton occasionally mix it with people like Alessio De Leda, because it's funny. But it also does sort of raise the standards of any series these drivers come in, because if you don't watch DTM but you hear Lewis Hamilton's going to be racing in a DTM race, you might tune into DTM, and therefore DTM has more viewers. I think it'd be so much of a benefit to young drivers and the rest of motorsport to actually have a cap on how long Formula 1 careers could be. I think Fernando Alonso should get the plaudits for the longest career ever, because it is insane. Like, I was 11 when he debuted. Look at me now, and he's still going. It is incredible. I think it's a bad idea, but it's too late to stop him. Just let him have his 20 years, and then someone have a word with him and say, please, Fernando, just stop. Lewis, someone needs to do the same. I mean, Toto Wolff, I know he loves him so much, but at some point, he's going to have to ride off into the sunset. And it's better that it's sooner than later, because every year that goes by, if Mercedes aren't in the picture to be successful, he's just destroying his own legacy. He had quite a good win percentage at the end of 2020, and that has been completely wiped out. All the Lewis Hamilton fans, I'm sure there'll be a couple who complain about this video, leaving very intelligent remarks in the comments. They always do. Even they must feel like if he's not winning all the time, what's the point? I know why Mercedes have paid a huge amount of money to keep Lewis Hamilton on, because I'm sure he is a great brand ambassador. Like, he does have a presence, and he speaks clearly, and he looks smart. Like, he's basically perfect poster boy for any brand. So yeah, they'll keep him around, because I'm sure that does make them money back. But surely that has like a diminishing returns as if he's not being successful. But I don't know how business works, but I'd imagine so. But I'm disappointed that space isn't being made for Frederick Vesti. If Lewis Hamilton had signed on for one more year, but they actually said the plan is we're going to sign Hamilton on for one more year, Vesti is going to be a development driver, he's going to do a few of his first practice sessions, and Lewis Hamilton is going to work with him to get him Formula 1 ready, and then he's going to step aside, and in 2025 Frederick Vesti is going to debut in Formula 1 for Mercedes, alongside George Russell, who by then will have 6 or 7 seasons of Formula 1 under his belt, and will kind of be a veteran. I do have a feeling that at some point, possibly at the end of the 2 years, Mercedes will instead try and sign someone like Charles Leclerc. They could go for a risk and get someone like Guan Yu Zhou, but I don't think Guan Yu Zhou is going to be around much longer, sadly. But I think that's the way they'd go. They wouldn't trust a young driver in such a prestigious seat, even when they're, 6th. But it's disappointing. I didn't want to see Lewis Hamilton sign another contract. It's not just because I don't like him, and I don't like him. I think he's a hypocritical, ignorant, annoying, worthless toad. But I don't deny that he is a great racing driver. I know exactly why Mercedes have signed him on again, and I know he's like the perfect brand ambassador. I accept that he's not a terrible person, he just annoys the shit out of me. And it's also just the state of Formula 1 that we're not seeing enough young drivers get a chance. I think honestly the best solution would be get more teams on the grid, but you've got to fight the teams that are there to get them to accept that. It's just ridiculous. The power dynamic in Formula 1 is all wrong. The rule set is all wrong. I want them to get rid of DRS. There's so many things I think Formula 1 should change, but they never will, because I'm sure at the moment it's making a lot of money. Next season, 24 races. It's far too much. The perfect Formula 1 calendar is 16 races, and 10 of those races should be in Europe. That's just the way it should be. 3 in Asia, 2 in America, and Australia. That's it. Just do that. Don't need to have 7 races in the Middle East where all the tracks look identical and they have this massive runoff and nothing ever really happens because it's actually really hard to overtake at these tracks. We don't need to see street races in Baku and God knows where else. Miami, and it's not really a street race. Las Vegas, whether that's going to be like. Maybe it'll be amazing, I don't know. But maybe I just felt like having a moan. This has turned out to be a 20-minute video just moaning about Lewis Hamilton signing a contract. Nothing I ever say will change anything. But I hope that one day Formula 1 starts to right itself and becomes the entertaining powerhouse it always should be. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I might cut some of this out because it's nearly 20 minutes long. But thank you for watching if you still are, and have a good one.